What happens when a former royal sits down with five of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle faces off against the View panel in what quickly becomes one of the most explosive confrontations in the show's history. Tonight's episode was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview, but what transpired was nothing short of television chaos that had viewers glued to their screens and social media buzzing within minutes. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when diplomatic pleasantries turn into accusations, when carefully crafted public personas crumble under pressure, and when what was meant to be a simple promotional appearance becomes a masterclass in how celebrity interviews can go spectacularly wrong. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the View set last night. What should have been a standard publicity appearance to discuss her latest philanthropic endeavors instead became a powder keg waiting to explode. The studio audience, initially excited to see the Duchess of Sussex, had no idea they were about to witness one of the most uncomfortable and heated exchanges in recent television history. As Meghan settled into her chair, adjusting her cream-colored blazer with practiced elegance, the five hosts of The View seemed unusually animated. Whoopi Goldberg maintained her characteristic, composed demeanor, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in her eyes. Joy Behar kept glancing at her notes with what appeared to be barely contained anticipation. Sarah Haynes wore a diplomatic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, while Alyssa Farah Griffin sat unusually straight, her journalist instincts clearly on high alert. Sunny Hostin, perhaps most tellingly, had arranged her papers with the precision of someone preparing for battle rather than casual conversation. The opening pleasantries felt forced from the start. When Whoopi introduced Meghan with the standard warm welcome, there was an underlying current that veteran viewers of the show would recognize as the calm before the storm. Meghan responded with her trademark gracious smile and perfectly modulated voice, thanking the hosts for having her and expressing how excited she was to be there. But seasoned observers could detect something beneath the surface politeness on both sides of the table. The first few minutes proceeded according to script. Questions about her recent charitable work, her children, and her life in California were met with Meghan's well-rehearsed responses about finding purpose, protecting her family's privacy, and building a better world for future generations. The audience responded positively, applauding at appropriate moments, seemingly unaware that the hosts were methodically building towards something much more substantial than small talk. It was Joy Behar who first shifted the conversation into more contentious territory. With her characteristic directness, she brought up the ongoing discussions about the monarchy's relevance in modern society, particularly in light of recent public opinion polls showing declining support among younger generations. Meghan's response was measured but pointed, speaking about the importance of institutions evolving with the times and becoming more inclusive and representative of the people they serve. The camera caught subtle exchanges of glances between the hosts, the kind of silent communication that happens between people who work together daily and can read each other's intentions. Sunny Hostin leaned forward slightly, her legal background evident in the way she began to frame her next question with the precision of someone building a case rather than making casual conversation. When Sunny brought up the recent controversy surrounding some of Meghan's public statements about her experience within the royal family, specifically questioning whether some of her claims had been contradicted by subsequent reporting, the atmosphere in the studio shifted noticeably. Meghan's smile became more fixed, her posture more defensive. She began her response by acknowledging that there are always different perspectives on any situation, but there was a slight edge to her voice that hadn't been there moments before. Alyssa Farah Griffin, drawing on her political communications background, pressed further by asking about the impact of public statements on diplomatic relationships, particularly given the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. She framed it as a question about responsibility and the ripple effects of public figures' words. But the implication was clear to everyone in the studio that Meghan's response revealed the first crack in her composed facade. While maintaining her diplomatic tone, she began speaking more quickly, her hands moving more expressively as she defended her right to share her own experiences and truth. She emphasized the word truth with particular intensity, suggesting that she found the line of questioning presumptuous and inappropriate. Sarah Haynes attempted to diffuse the building tension by redirecting toward Meghan's upcoming projects, but the damage to the cordial atmosphere was already done. The subsequent answers felt increasingly strained, with Meghan's responses becoming more guarded and the host's follow-up questions carrying sharper edges. The studio audience began to sense the shift in energy. Where there had been warm applause and occasional laughter, there was now an uncomfortable quiet broken only by nervous shuffling and the occasional awkward chuckle. The cameras captured close-ups of audience members exchanging worried glances, clearly sensing that they were witnessing something far more intense than a typical celebrity interview. Whoopi, perhaps recognizing the need to address the elephant in the room, brought up the recent media coverage of Meghan's various public appearances and statements since stepping back from royal duties. She asked directly whether Meghan felt that constant media attention and public scrutiny were justified consequences of her previous position and continued public profile. This question seemed to strike a particularly sensitive nerve. Meghan's carefully maintained composure showed visible strain as she began discussing the unfair treatment she believed she had received from certain media outlets. Her voice carried a note of frustration that she had kept carefully controlled up to this point, and she spoke about the responsibility of media figures to be accurate and fair in their reporting. The irony was not lost on anyone in the studio that she was making these comments while sitting across from 5 women who were, themselves, members of the media landscape she was critiquing. Joy Behar's eyebrows raised slightly, and Sunny Hostin's expression suggested she was preparing a response that would escalate rather than de-escalate the conversation. As the commercial break approached, the tension had reached a level where even the most casual viewer could sense that something significant was building. The hosts had moved beyond their typical roles as interviewers and were clearly positioning themselves as interrogators. Meghan, for her part, was no longer the gracious guest making a promotional appearance, but someone who felt increasingly cornered and defensive. The stage was set for what would become an unprecedented confrontation, with neither side seemingly willing to back down from the collision course they had set themselves upon. What had begun as standard daytime television fare was rapidly transforming into something far more volatile and unpredictable, with the promise of explosive revelations and heated exchanges that would dominate headlines and social media discussions. For days to come, when the cameras rolled back from commercial break, the atmosphere in the studio had somehow grown even more charged. The brief intermission had done nothing to cool tempers, and if anything, seemed to have given both sides time to prepare their ammunition for what was about to unfold. Meghan sat rigidly in her chair, her previous relaxed posture replaced by the defensive stance of someone ready for battle. The View hosts had clearly used the break to regroup, and their collective energy suggested they were prepared to push boundaries that had never been tested on daytime television. Whoopi wasted no time diving back into controversial territory, but this time with a directness that caught even veteran viewers off guard. She addressed Meghan's previous comments about media responsibility and asked pointedly whether that same standard should apply to public figures who make serious allegations, without providing concrete evidence. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Meghan's immediate reaction was telling. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and her hands gripped the arms of her chair. Meghan's response was swift and sharp, abandoning the diplomatic tone she had maintained throughout the first portion of the interview. She stated firmly that her experiences were her truth, and that questioning the validity of someone's lived experiences was not only inappropriate, but potentially harmful. Her voice carried a new edge, and she made direct eye contact with each host as she spoke, clearly indicating that she was no longer interested in playing the role of gracious guest. Sunny Hostin, her legal instincts fully engaged, seized on this opening with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. She brought up specific instances where Meghan's public statements had been contradicted by documented evidence or eyewitness accounts, presenting them not as accusations, but as requests for clarification. The way she framed each question suggested she had done extensive research and was prepared for whatever response Meghan might offer. The confrontation escalated rapidly when Sunny mentioned the discrepancies in Meghan's account of her wedding to Prince Harry, specifically regarding claims about a private ceremony that palace sources had disputed. Meghan's reaction was immediate and visceral. She leaned forward aggressively and accused Sunny of perpetuating harmful narratives that had been deliberately spread to undermine her credibility. Joy Behar, never one to shy away from controversy, jumped into the fray by questioning whether Meghan's public statements had been motivated more by personal grievances than genuine concern for social justice issues. She suggested that using platforms meant for serious discourse to settle personal scores was problematic and potentially damaging to the causes Meghan claimed to champion. This accusation seemed to hit a nerve that previous questions had only grazed. Meghan's composure cracked visibly as she raised her voice for the first time, declaring that she had sacrificed more for her principles than any of the hosts could possibly understand. She spoke about giving up her career, her country, and her security to speak truth to power, and accused the panel of being complicit in the very system of oppression she was fighting against. The studio audience had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Camera operators zoomed in on faces throughout the audience, capturing expressions of shock, discomfort, and fascination as viewers realized they were watching a career-defining moment unfold in real time. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to inject some journalistic objectivity into the increasingly personal exchange by asking about the broader implications of public figures making unsubstantiated claims in the current media environment. She framed it as a question about responsibility in an era of misinformation, but Meghan clearly perceived it as another attack on her credibility. Meghan's response revealed just how deeply the questions had affected her. She accused the hosts of holding her to a different standard than other public figures, suggesting that their line of questioning was motivated by bias rather than journalistic integrity. She specifically called out what she perceived as a pattern of aggressive questioning that she claimed other guests would never face. Sarah Haynes, who had been trying to maintain some semblance of diplomatic balance, made the mistake of suggesting that perhaps both sides could find common ground in their shared commitment to truth and accountability. This attempt at mediation backfired spectacularly when Meghan interpreted it as condescending and dismissive of her experiences. The turning point came when Whoopi, clearly frustrated with the direction of the conversation, made a comment about accountability that Meghan perceived as a direct challenge to her integrity. The exact words would be debated and analyzed for days afterward, but the impact was immediate and devastating to any hope of civil discourse. Meghan's face flushed with anger as she stood up partially from her chair, pointing directly at Whoopi, while declaring that she would not sit there and be lectured about accountability by people who had never faced the level of scrutiny and persecution she had endured. Her voice carried a tremor of genuine emotion that made it clear this was no longer about public relations or damage control. This had become deeply personal. The hosts, rather than backing down in the face of Meghan's obvious distress, seemed to interpret her emotional response as confirmation that their questions had hit their mark. Sunny Hostin pressed forward with another pointed question about specific contradictions in Meghan's public statements, while Joy Behar made a comment about the difference between persecution and accountability that clearly struck another nerve. What happened next would be replayed countless times on social media and analyzed by media critics for weeks to come. Meghan, her carefully constructed public persona completely abandoned, made a statement that crossed a line from which there would be no return. The words that came out of her mouth would define not just this interview, but potentially her entire public reputation moving forward. Standing fully from her chair now, Meghan's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio freeze. She looked directly at the panel and declared, "You people are exactly what's wrong with this country. You sit here pretending to be journalists when you're nothing but gossip merchants trading in cruelty for ratings. None of you have accomplished anything meaningful in your lives except tearing down people who actually try to make a difference." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed stunned by the venom in her words. Whoopi's face transformed from surprise to barely controlled fury, while the other hosts sat in shocked silence, processing what had just been said to them on live television. But Meghan wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and years of pent-up frustration came pouring out in a torrent of accusations that would make headlines around the world. She pointed at Joy Behar and said, "You've built your entire career on cheap shots and petty commentary. You call yourself a comedian, But there's nothing funny about using your platform to spread malicious lies about people you've never met. Joy's mouth fell open, her usual quick wit completely abandoned in the face of such a direct and personal attack. She started to respond, but Meghan cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand that communicated pure contempt. Turning to Sunny Hostin, Meghan's voice dripped with disdain as she continued her assault. And you, with your law degree that you wave around like it gives you the right to prosecute people in the court of public opinion. You're not a real journalist. You're just another attack dog dressed up in designer clothes, pretending that your viciousness is somehow intellectual. Sunny's professional composure cracked as she started to stand, clearly prepared to defend herself, but Whoopi placed a restraining hand on her arm while never taking her eyes off Meghan. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point that felt dangerous, as if physical confrontation was a real possibility. Meghan then turned her attention to Sarah Haynes, her voice becoming even more cutting. At least the others have the courage of their convictions and their cruelty. You sit there pretending to be the reasonable one, the peacemaker, but you're the worst of all because you enable their behavior while maintaining plausible deniability. You're a coward hiding behind false neutrality. Sarah's face went pale, and she looked as if she had been physically slapped. Her attempt to maintain diplomatic composure throughout the interview had not only failed, but had somehow made her a target for even harsher criticism than the others. Alyssa Farah Griffin, perhaps sensing that her turn was coming, attempted to interject with a call for civility, but Meghan rounded on her with renewed fury. Don't you dare lecture me about civility when you spent years working for an administration that specialized in cruelty and division. You have zero credibility to speak about decency or truth, and the fact that you're sitting here judging me is the height of hypocrisy. The personal nature of these attacks had crossed every line of acceptable behavior for a television interview. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many covering their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing. Some audience members were reaching for their phones, clearly recognizing that they were watching television history being made in the most uncomfortable way possible. Finally, Meghan turned back to Whoopi, saving what appeared to be her most vicious commentary for last. And you, the so-called elder stateswoman of this pathetic panel, you've spent decades in this business, and this is what you have to show for it. A daytime talk show where you ambush guests and pretend it's journalism? You should be ashamed of what you've become, but clearly shame isn't something any of you are capable of feeling. Whoopi had heard enough. Rising slowly from her chair with the deliberate movements of someone fighting to maintain control, she fixed Meghan with a stare that could have melted steel. When she spoke, her voice was low and controlled, but carried an unmistakable threat. You need to leave. Right now. Security will escort you out if necessary, but you're done here. Meghan laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound with no humor in it. Oh, I'm leaving. Don't worry about that. I wouldn't spend another second in this toxic environment with you mediocre people if you paid me. But before I go, let me make something crystal clear to all of you and everyone watching. She turned to face the cameras directly, her eyes blazing with an intensity that was both captivating and disturbing. This is exactly why nothing ever changes in this country. These people claim to stand for progressive values and women supporting women, but the moment someone actually challenges the status quo, they turn into exactly what they pretend to oppose. They're hypocrites, every single one of them. The camera operators continued filming, recognizing that they were capturing a moment that would be studied and analyzed for years to come. The director, presumably in the control room, made the decision to keep rolling rather than cut to commercial, understanding that this was the kind of unscripted television that viewers would never forget. Joy Behar finally found her voice and fired back. You don't get to come on our show and insult us because you can't handle legitimate questions about your public statements. This is exactly the kind of behavior that proves our point about accountability. This response seemed to trigger something even deeper in Meghan's anger. She whirled around to face Joy directly and spat out words that would become the most quoted line from the entire confrontation. Accountability? You want to talk about accountability? None of you have ever been held accountable for the damage you do with your poisonous commentary every single day. You destroy people for entertainment and call it journalism. You're everything that's wrong with media in this country. With that final declaration, Meghan grabbed her purse and started toward the exit, but not before delivering one last parting shot that would cement her reputation as someone who had completely lost control of her public image. She turned back to the panel and said, "Enjoy your little show, ladies. You've just proven to the world exactly who you really are." The sound of her heels clicking against the studio floor as she stormed out was amplified by the complete silence that had fallen over the audience. Even the usual background noise of a television production had ceased, as if everyone involved recognized they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Whoopi sat back down heavily, her professional demeanor struggling to reassert itself after such a personal attack. The other hosts remained in various states of shock and anger, none quite sure how to proceed after such an explosive confrontation. The camera held on the empty chair where Meghan had been sitting, a visual metaphor for the destruction of what was supposed to have been a routine celebrity interview. In the space of less than an hour, a carefully orchestrated publicity appearance had devolved into one of the most uncomfortable and hostile exchanges in daytime television history. AS producers scrambled to figure out how to fill the remaining time in the show. Viewers at home and in the studio audience were left to process what they had just witnessed. The confrontation had revealed something raw and ugly about celebrity culture, media dynamics, and the barely contained hostilities that simmer beneath the surface of supposedly civilized discourse. The aftermath would dominate news cycles and social media discussions for days. But in that moment, as the studio sat in stunned silence, everyone present understood they had just witnessed the complete destruction of Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public image in the most spectacular fashion imaginable.